Hello, everybody. This is Hal Herring. Thank you so much for being here. This is the Carry in the Fire podcast. And in Carry in the Fire, we are seeking the old knowledge to carry with us into a future that we are building right now. And this interview I've got today with Boyce Upholt, who's down in New Orleans, fits exactly with that because Boyce has written a book that I think everybody should know about. It's called The Great River by Boyce Upholt, The Making and Unmaking of the Mississippi. And he carries us from the literally before the mound builder culture, actually in some glacial and geologic time, to the present on the greatest river, I think, in the world. You got the Nile and the Amazon, the Mississippi. Um, and I had a thoroughly good time reading the book. And I think that the knowledge carried in there, Boyce, that you put, you didn't even try. It's just you found it. It's a found object. Is a blueprint for the future of human beings working more in accordance with natural processes. The unmaking part of the book is fantastic.
And terrifying too sometimes. Yeah. Some one
Yeah.
of my Amazon reviewers was like, I didn't expect this book to be so, I don't know, scary or dark. And I was like, well, I hope there's hope in there too, but I think you're right about the found object. I feel like I'm just a student here and talked to everyone I could and read whatever I could. So it's not necessarily my knowledge, but there is definitely, the way you're speaking about it is exactly how I think about it. There's a lot of deep knowledge on the Mississippi River that we haven't been paying attention to for the past couple centuries. So,
Yeah, no doubt. It's I was going to read just a couple of the, the Washington Post, for instance, eloquent story of the ways of the Mississippi River is a separate world hidden in our plain sight. I thought that was really cool because I lived in New Orleans, and the river's omnipresent, but you don't see it unless you go down like to the moonwalk or but it's there's a great one, and I thought about this, Boyce, was everybody that I read the reviews of was taken from your book ideas that fit their own passion. And I don't mean their own bias so much, but like Grist had one. It said like the catastrophic unintended consequences of our actions, right?
right.
And that's true too. And
Absolutely,
it's a hidden, yeah. Like so, it was beautiful. I thought that, and as you're taking from it what fits your own passions or your own interests, you're also faced with a lot of contradictory information that you have to absorb. It's an amazing experience. I want to talk about what you're doing right now, though, in New Orleans with Southlands magazine before we get started on the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Southlands is when I finished this book, I was like, what am I going to do next? And somehow I decided what the world needed was a new print magazine. And I think it really does. And so Southlands is a twice a year print magazine. We've got one issue out last October. And then this next issue will be out in May, keep going spring, fall, but it's all about, nature, outdoors culture, kind of like how do the people of the South relate to the natural world. Because I think that, so I'm not originally from this region. I grew up in the suburbs in Connecticut, but have been down here for almost 20 years. And so it's kind of found knowledge to me in the same way the Mississippi is. It's an unusual migration pattern to come from New England to the South and stick around. And I've learned so much here. And so it's this magazine sort of my way of honoring some of that and honoring sort of the literary heritage of this place. There's just so much great literature here. So just trying to do really top-notch writing and photography, exploring these things in a region that gets kind of left out of the great magazines of the world, the Outsides, the Mountain Gazettes, things like that. Of like, there's a space to film. So,
yeah, and I think the South needs it. We're so tight. Like growing up there, everything was hunting and fishing for me, and going to the river, and yet environmentally, it's probably like the least. It's the most. I remember, and I wish I could remember who this fiction writer was, but it's a story about a guy in South Alabama who owns this gas station, and they ask him, why he's like dumped solvent out on all this stuff, and and he goes, "You want to talk about your environment? Look out there. There's the environment." And I believe that when you look at those houses being engulfed with kudzu and all that, the world seems so resilient in the South that people who live there think that it might be impervious to our destruction.
Yeah.
At least until recently, I think. Like I look in North Alabama, where it's obviously not.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, part of it is too, like, I don't know. Well, you make me think about Alabama specifically and how it's incredible. I mean, like I've read this line before of like, it speaks to just how rich a place it is that it remains one of the most biodiverse places in the country, despite having some of the worst environmental laws. But
Yeah.
those are sort of like two lines that are going to cross at some point, and it's not going to stay one of the most biodiverse places if we don't change it. But what I found, right, like I have this like tangle of experiences as someone who moved to this region where like I mostly, before I moved to New Orleans, I lived in rural Mississippi. So I got to know the rural South first, and I saw these places that were altered in all these ways, but saw so much beauty. But like the storytelling, I did, like, I'm a journalist. And so I was always asked to write these environmental stories about like Cancer Alley in Louisiana. And like just the picture that I was being asked to paint was always how destroyed it was. And there's this very careful balance of like, you got to be aware of that so that you don't, like, you got to know it's falling apart to protect it. But on the flip side, I feared that if the only environmental stories were just like, man, the South is just polluted and blasted, and we didn't remember that we still have beauty, that no one would bother to protect it. So that's kind of the balance I'm trying to strike, is like, look at the great things you can do here, look at the things we need to celebrate, and half the magazine saying, well, here's what you got to also know and pay attention to if you want this region to not just stay clean, but I think like accessible, right? Like there's a lot of issues of new people moving in and new money altering landscapes. And so like, what does it look like so that everyone in this region who's been here forever, people who come anew, people of all these different races, that we all get to access the forests and the rivers and the wetlands.
Yeah. And that's a crucial thing that's being lost right now. It's been lost in my lifetime, it is just because of the consolidation of private land and then the fragmentation of everything else, right?
Right.
And one of the things in Southlands, so I was reading Olivia Pascal's, is that how you pronounce her name?
I should know better. I did, yeah.
Yeah, her piece on Wendell Berry, and
Yeah.
like what does that mean in modernity and the way we understand things. Wendell is probably 90
Yep.
now, and I thought that was really interesting. My favorite piece in Southlands right now, I mean, it is Christopher Brown's piece about the industrial spaces.
Yeah.
And that speaks to exactly what we're talking about. When I was a kid, I wrote a story about a boy who specialized in traveling the spaces in between, like the ditches, the places where other people saw nothing at all.
Right.
And that's what Christopher Brown's story is, but in the industrial world of Houston.
Yeah. Yeah. Chris has a great book called A History of Natural Lot or Empty Lots. And like, yeah, he's just super interested in these spaces. He actually built a house kind of like on an old plot of land along the Colorado River outside Austin, Texas, where there are just like pipeline right of ways and this and that, and sort of is saying like, lean into these spaces. And they're right, like it's a complicated idea because it's like they are tainted in their own ways, but he sort of gets inspired by like the fact that there are, coyotes prowling through urban Austin and through the Gulf Coast, and that these fence lines give refuge for birds. It's not our ideal world, but it's a reminder of like how powerful nature is. And like, if it can thrive, even when we're messing it up, if we just gave it a little push in a better direction, imagine how quickly we could have a better world.
Right. He mentions the original grassland species. I'm big on that right now. I always have been, but I did an interview with Southeastern Grasslands Initiative up in Nashville.
Yeah.
And I was really blown away by that and Kyle Liebarger's stuff in Alabama. But Chris Brown talks about the native wildflowers of Texas, and they're found like on these hurricane fence lines between two factories, one abandoned.
Yep.
And that the DNA in some of those coyotes is mixed with red wolf genes that we thought we'd lost, right?
Yeah, that stuff. I'm actually working on a magazine piece right now about these red wolf coyote hybrids, and that stuff just fascinates me. It's Cameron Parish, Louisiana, just this pack of mostly red wolf coyote, like heavily red wolf coyotes, and they're like doing so well that they're expanding their territory. It's an incredible story.
I can't wait to read that. We could talk all day about that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Jan DeBlue wrote a book a long time ago. She's a friend of my sister's, a great nonfiction writer in North Carolina, called Meant to Be Wild.
Okay.
And one of the chapters was on the attempted reintroduction of the red wolf, like down at St. Vincent's in
Yep.
Florida,
Yeah.
which I don't think it took.
They still have a couple in Florida. Like they put pups out in Florida still and let them kind of like get used to the wild. The main pack is in Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in coastal North Carolina, but they're struggling out there mostly just because a lot like some powerful locals just like they don't want wolves in their backyard and
Right.
made a policy headache. And so there's I think 30 in the wild, and Fish and Wildlife Service says we need 700 of these things to call them actually restored. So
Right.
it's way off in the distance.
Yeah, I wonder how many coyotes are carrying those genes in their tens of thousands. Talk about keeping stuff alive, right?
Yeah, it's just incredible, and for me, it's been a challenge. Like think about, I mean, even what do we call these things? People call them ghost wolves. Some people are like, no, they really are. We should just call them red wolves, and other people say they're coyotes. And it's just a reminder of like all that science simplifies the world, and the world's just a messy, complicated place that weird things are going on beyond our notice. So,
which could lead us directly to your book.
Yeah, sounds good.
I mean, like if there's ever been an example of weird things going on, it's the million square miles watershed of the Mississippi.
Yep.
And I was gonna I'm gonna do this. I was gonna ask you to do it, but I should have asked you before. It's in the frontispiece of your book is Lucille Clifton's poem.
Yep.
The Mississippi River empties into the Gulf, and I'm just gonna read it really quick.
Yeah, please. I love that poem. So.
It is the great circulation of the earth's body, like the blood of the gods, this river in which the past is always flowing. Every water is the same water coming round. Every day, someone is standing on the edge of this river, staring into time and whispering mistakenly, only here, only now. That's a piece of work, buddy.
It is a piece of work. It just spoke. So when I found that, I like read a whole collection, any poems I could find about the river I read. And then this one was like, no, that is like, I mean, you don't even need to read the book. You can read, and that's actually like 3/4 of the whole poem. And all you need is that 3/4 of the poem, and you get the idea of what I'm trying to do here.
So. Yeah, only here, only now.
Yep. And then just the whispering mistakenly too, just like, to me, that's a big piece of it, is like what a lot of people have misunderstood and not seen about the Mississippi River.
Yeah. Do you think it was just too vast? I mean, we'll start with Thomas Jefferson here in a second, but one of the things I wanted to get from you was your story and how you came to this story, how you found it.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about your origins.
Yeah. So I already said I grew up in suburban Connecticut, which is not part. It's a million square mile watershed, and where I grew up is not part of it. And I knew from a young age that my dream was to be a writer, but I didn't really know what that meant. I think at first I was really like wanted novels and short stories, and living in the suburbs, I was like, I'll be the next John Cheever. But I was I knew intuitively I had to get out of the suburbs to become a writer. I had to like see more interesting thing. It's not a very interesting place. I mean, it is, everywhere's interesting, but I was like, let me just rattle myself. And so wandered around for a couple of years after college and landed in rural Mississippi for a job with a nonprofit called Teach for America. So I had taught actually for a couple of years in South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and then was training some teachers down in the Mississippi Delta, right? So that's this chunk of low-lying floodplain land south of Memphis. And that's where I finally started. Living there was kind of like a kick in the butt that got me going writing. In part, I remember living in one of my houses. My landlord, I was like working on a writing project, and my landlord was like, "Oh, you know who's been in this room for party? Like John Grisham and Barry Hannah and this person." Like it's just like, it's such a literary place, and I think that was part of it. And it was so fascinating, like the history of this place that was a swamp that was turned into a giant farm where blues comes from. Just all this stuff made me start writing. So,
what county was that?
So I lived in a couple of different counties. So Sunflower County, so Indianola is where I lived first. And then the town I call home now still in a lot of ways is Cleveland, Mississippi. So it's in Bolivar County. I still get back. I have some really good friends up there. I get that back there pretty often. But I lived there for 6 years, and I hadn't thought about the Mississippi River at all because much like here in New Orleans, right, there's a big levee. We've built rebuilt the river in such a way that we can forget that it's there, even though the river built this region. It's just like you don't see it anymore. But as I was getting going as a journalist, I was like, this looks like a fun story idea. This being this man named John Ruskey, who's a canoe guide in Mississippi. He's sort of locally, everyone locally knows who he is because it's kind of crazy to take tourists out on the Mississippi River, and that's what John does. And so there's a new publication called The Bitter Southerner popped up, and I was like, maybe they'll let me go on this adventure with this local guy that I've never met before. So I was like, hey, let me just profile this man, and I'm going to go spend a couple of days canoeing on the Mississippi River with him. So I did, and it was really it changed my life literally in so many ways because I didn't know what to expect. I remember thinking the Mississippi River was like a toxic thing. If you touched it, you'd grow a third arm or something. And we got out there, and that first night of camping on an island on the Mississippi River, I was like, oh my God, I've been here for 6 years, living 15 miles from this river, and no one told me it is like one of the wildest, most beautiful places in America. And so I just knew from that moment on, I wanted to keep coming back, and whatever journalism I could find about the river, I would do. And I just want to understand how it was that kind of in the middle of America, in a place that was so heavily altered and turned into these cotton farms, soybean farms, there was still this wilderness left there. So I just kept digging and digging, and 8 years later came out with this book.
Wow. Yeah. Well, yeah. I that speaks something to what we started out with, where there's kind of this ecophobia that people can get in the South. Like they're going, oh my Lord, Cancer Alley. Oh no, the Tennessee River, which has been so much cleaner now than when I was born,
Right.
And then they it's almost a nihilism. You're off the hook, right? Because the river's so messed up, right? I can't do anything about that, and that's just that's totally not true. I mean, you would go and meet people who are taking their daily bread from that river, and they're living on the banks, and I just I was really aware of that when I became an adult.
Yep.
Of people who thought that these places were like broken.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, like some of it is, I think it is, this is all self-serving the way you say. Some of it is just the result of it's hard to get to, right? There's only a couple bridges, there's these levees. And so there's a few people that make the difficult, live the hard life on the other side of the levee and have this intimate relationship with it. And the rest of us rarely see it. And I think, again, I don't think this is intentional, but I think that for some of the more powerful industry, like the navigation industry, in some ways, even farmers, I know some farmers that know and love the river and go out there fishing and duck hunting and all that. But in this weird sense, we built these levees, we built this navigation system that hid the river away. And the people who benefit from that benefit from keeping people away, because I am always we need more people to fall in love with the Mississippi River and see it as beautiful. But I think if we did that, right, if every American knew the Mississippi River and had a vote, we might vote to say, well, maybe we don't want all these dams here in this,
right?
Let's set it back to wild. And so it's this weird thing of powerful people, wealthy people who benefit from engineering the river also benefit from having people not know just how beautiful it is, and that it is this resource that we all could be going and enjoying.
Right. I think one of the things in chapter 11 of your book, chapter 10, the unmaking, I think if people knew just how much we spent on federal flood insurance as a result of our engineering the river,
yep.
that it would be an immediate change. Like the politicians would take up. I mean, we're building federal debt every year because of this. I know it wasn't misguided at the time, maybe.
Right.
But what we know now, it's like you're in a hole with a shovel and you're just digging your own grave.
Yeah, and that's true in so many ways, right? It's like flood insurance. I think it's crop insurance on the Mississippi. The farmers, I'm doing some reporting on farmers in the Mississippi Delta now, and they're underwater this year. And if they all switched and grew food instead of soybeans, they'd do a lot better, but they can't switch because they don't have the appropriate processing facilities and things like that. And so part of it is I don't know, people talk about path dependency, right? You push the system in one direction and it's hard to get out of that. And that's one of the crises, problems I noticed on the Mississippi River is the world we've built on the Mississippi is so wrong. But at this point, I'm I wish the levees didn't exist, except for I don't want them not to exist because my house, the river's just a couple hundred feet this way. And if there wasn't a levee there, I wouldn't, this house that I own would be in trouble. And so it's this weird situation of even the flood insurance, it's hard to, even as people know it's wrong, but it's hard to undo because you just are we going to screw everyone over and just send them out to to wash away in these floods. We can't quite do that.
No, I think there's an old National Wildlife Federation study from 1999 called it's called Higher Ground,
Mm-hmm.
and they do the money analysis of cost benefit analysis for buyouts for anybody who's been paid 3 times by the federal flood insurance.
Right.
And you could restore floodplains all across the country if you with the federal money, right?
Yeah.
Like this is leaving people whole.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And I know there's a guy in your book who he's like, well, we can't do that. You're talking about just taking people's land. That's a great line because I'm saying no. And I stopped the book when I was reading it. And I was like, no, we're not taking people's land. We have to stop the hemorrhaging of taxpayer money that keeps people in what's supposed to be a giant filtering wetland.
Yeah. I mean, the floodplain's a weird place where the overlapping, this idea of America being a free country and private property, but I'm like, but the whole place has been so dependent on so many federal investments, and so like your name might be the name on the property title, but like it's my money that has allowed you to exist here. So.
And it's coming every year. It's getting more and more expensive for me to pay for you to be there.
Right.
It's so tough. And I did a piece in Field and Stream one time called Let It Flood, how we could create a hunting and fishing paradise and address the deficit or the debt at the same time. And it was based on Higher Ground NWF study. But as I was reading your book, I kept thinking, holy smokes, this may come. And at the end of our talk today, I want to, the end of your book is perhaps the remaking, right?
Right.
Or the unraveling of what the knots we've tied.
Yeah. If we can,
if we can
do, but yeah.
And I would, as I was reading this, there was an economic argument for building the levees and all of that. I get it. I mean, right. I read, when I was telling you that when John Barry said that this was one of the best book written about the Mississippi River, yours, I was just like, wow, he passed the ultimate acid test because Barry's book, the 1927 flood, what's the title of it?
Rising Tide. Yeah.
Rising Tide.
Such a tremendous book. Yeah.
It changed my life. I couldn't believe how comprehensive, and also as in your book, what was revealed in that book, just stuff you'd never thought of, right?
Yeah, he's incredible, and he's got a book in the works now about the Louisiana coast. So I'm excited to see that whenever it. He told me the manuscript was 700 pages, so he might have some cutting to do. But I'm excited to read it when it's out.
I've been there.
Yeah, we all have.
Man. I was so you had done a lot of firsthand experience, like kayaking and canoeing the river before you kind of set pen to paper on this, right?
And so, yeah, I mean, it depends on when you mark first setting pen to paper. I mean, I wrote that trip I mentioned before when I went out with John Ruskey, who's now sort of a dear friend and a river mentor. That was 2015, and I published a profile of him not long after that. And some of the paragraphs from that profile are in the introduction, so it's like slowly accumulating. But what happened was. And so at first my dream was to write, I don't know, like a pilgrim at Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek was an inspiration, right? And I thought I was doing a lot of canoeing and camping in just the backwaters right near the Delta. And I was like, let me just write this like little poetic book about this place. But I had some mentors that basically were like, you could do that if you want. No one's going to read it. No one's going to pay you much money for it. No one's going to read it. You have to be more ambitious. And I wasn't that into that. But in 2017, John Ruskey, he made this incredible resource called RiverGator, which is a website that allows you to see, like lists all the islands and sandbars and boat ramps. So if you're canoeing down the Mississippi River, you know where to go. And so he had finished that. It was a 10-year project. He finished that up and he said, I'm going to sort of celebrate that and promote this thing by doing the whole lower river, starting in St. Louis and coming down. And he said, you want to come along? And my career had just gotten to the stage where I was making enough money writing that I didn't need to work an office job anymore. So I was like, sure, I'll go spend 6 weeks canoeing the Mississippi River. So I've seen, to the extent of the rivers always change, right? That you can't step in the same river twice, but I have seen a version of the river from St. Louis all the way down, and then sold the book a couple of years after that trip. And then from there kind of did more car-based reporting across the rest of the watershed, flew up to Minneapolis, drove up to Kansas City, kind of tried to go anywhere where there was some controversies over all this engineering we've done. So,
Wow. Yeah. And I didn't realize I was just in Minnesota and crossed the river right there. It was like minus 12 degrees.
can
And
be rough up there.
one of the things I was fascinated by, it's an Ojibwe word that comes right.
Mississippi, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I was fascinated by was how people, and I asked a lot of people about this, and they made these tighter wigwams than we can really think of nowadays, right? But the people up there live, pretty damn well
Yeah.
in that climate in association with that upper river. And it's super cold.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, man. And I know they must have taken boats because there was an extensive trade network. I want to talk about like how your book starts like with the mountain cultures and the trade networks there on the river. It's just incredible.
Yeah. In some ways, I think the book starts. It's funny, like it's interesting to hear you say the book starts with the mound builders because I think it starts three different ways. Like I couldn't figure out how to start it because I was like, in some ways, the core of the book is what the American years, as I call them, the past couple centuries. And so the very first page of the first chapter is actually about the Louisiana Purchase because in some ways that's the beginning of the unmaking of the Mississippi, right? The undoing. Right. And then I kind of wind back and talk about some of the first explorers that came along. And you asked earlier we never answered this question, but you said like what went wrong there. And there's this great story about LaSalle, right? LaSalle had come down to the mouth of the river and then he went back to France and then he tried to sail to the mouth of the river because he knew where it was and never found it. Famously, LaSalle kind of washed ashore in Texas, Matagorda Bay, and wandered around and got killed. And my theory is that he actually did, and I borrow this from a historian named Christopher Morris, but his notes suggest that LaSalle actually did go back to the mouth of the river and probably looked around and didn't recognize it because there's just no river. There's nothing like the Mississippi River Delta in Louisiana or in Europe. And so he couldn't recognize it. He'd only seen the mouth of the river from the land side, not from the ocean. And when he saw it from the ocean, he just couldn't conceive of what he was seeing as a river as big as what he knew. And so that's part of what went wrong. Basically, I think Europeans arrived having no mental model for a landscape like the Delta in particular, but a river as big as the Mississippi. Anyways, and so I kind of wind back into that. And then I feel like to really understand the river, I learned this myself in my reporting process. I had to wind back even further of like, if LaSalle got it wrong, who had it right? And the people who had it right were the people who have lived here for 12 to 14,000 years and have seen the Mississippi River change through these eras. And I just think there's this sort of underknown American epic along the lower Mississippi River in particular, where people built these sort of massive, we call them mounds often, but I call them in the book earthworks because I think mounds almost does not give them sufficient respect for how elaborate and beautiful they are. It's these sort of, yes, they're just earthen pyramids and earthen platforms, but they're typically arranged in ways that match astronomical patterns. And so like Poverty Point is, I think, almost 4,000 years old, let's say, pre-agricultural era, but there's signs there that trade goods that came from kind of all over the central continent. So almost 4,000 years ago, people were traveling across half a continent, gathering together for I picture it as like a Burning Man ceremony of these people coming from all over, coming together, doing something deeply, deeply important for like the politics and culture of this entire continent. And then that place gets abandoned and then 1,000 years go by and then another place like that. It's just this crazy timescales of people engaging with this river and people engaging in really cosmopolitan living that I didn't get taught anything about in high school, right? We just were like, none of this apparently existed until Europeans stumbled along. I'm like, no, actually there were whole cities like Cahokia is 1,000 years ago outside of St. Louis, 25,000 people, right? It's truly a city. And we just kind of overlook that when we think about what the Mississippi River is.
Yeah. I was lucky. One of the great really experiences of my life was, I took a class at the University of Alabama and it turned out it was a field archaeology class at Moundville.
Wow.
And it was just I just couldn't believe it. Like it was so much, and it was really fun.
Yeah.
Also it was a deep time experience at a time when I was really young, like 19. And you're kind of more living in that liminal world of imagination or whatever. And I could go down to the river and there, there's the mussel shells pouring out of the bank,
Right.
which was their mussel shell pile from
Yep.
1,000 years ago.
Yeah. Manville's a really beautiful site. I finally got there last year, and I like remember joking about it on social media of like, if I see a sign for a mound now, I'm like, well, I got to stop and take the time and go look at it, because I think there are just these, the sort of what I've tried to piece together of this ancient Mississippian cosmology. It just kind of informed my own ways of spiritually thinking about the world as well, I think. So
Me too, for sure, and deeper time.
Yep.
I've never been to Cahokia, but I was really interested in the book. Is it Jonesville, Arkansas, where there's a mound with the
Jonesville, Louisiana.
Louisiana. Okay.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, barely a mound, right? That's the sort of lost one, right? So I mentioned Poverty Point before, 3,700 years ago, and Cahokia is 1,000 years ago, and there's a couple in between. But this place, Troyville, is what the archaeologists often call it, and it was apparently another sort of very huge, elaborate, had an unusual. The mound there had this sort of like, it was like a bunch of tiers stacked, so like a kind of like a wedding cake almost, right? These like smaller and smaller tiers stacked up, and so it was very clearly this really important site, but it got knocked down so that they could build a bridge across a creek there, and so we have limited archaeological knowledge of it, and it doesn't get discussed with the same level as even some of these other things, which I think are deeply criminally under discussed. So
that's a great. There's a great setting there. Where you have the Dunbar Hunter expedition. Yep. It's 1804, where they find them and they're like, wow. I mean, they're suitably impressed with what they don't know.
Yes.
And I thought that was an interesting. The Dunbar writes about back to Jefferson, right?
That they were
Jefferson sent them.
Yeah, this was like right after the Louisiana Purchase, when nobody really, and by say nobody, I mean white Americans didn't know what was in the Louisiana Purchase, right? And so we know the Lewis and Clark expedition was the famous one. You got like Zebulon Pike, who went up the upper Mississippi. He went up the Arkansas and Red Rivers. And there's this like early, very curious expedition. These guys were like two fancy planter guys in Natchez, Mississippi, basically like gentlemen scientists. And initially they were supposed to go up the Red River, and I think everyone's like, I don't know if this is a good idea. There's like, we're almost at war with Spain. Maybe we shouldn't send these gentlemen out into dangerous territory. So they kind of did a test run up the Washita River. But the notes, Dan Flores, who's an incredible historian and writer, that
yes, for sure, I know him. Yeah,
I figured you did. He did a kind of helped edit and publish some of their notes, and it's this incredible resource. And so they stumbled upon this site of Troyville on that expedition. And to me, I said there's all these different beginnings to this book, and so they're this kind of way of this portal that slips us through all of them and shows us kind of how little we knew and was knew and understood in 1803. Like there were this epic place that was clearly one of the most important places in the continent, Troyville, this giant earthworks, and white people had found it because there was a guy that was like kind of raising cows on it at that point, but no one really knew, and we still don't know. So
well, that was interesting. It was interesting to me too that in 2004, that early, there were already planters in Natchez.
Yep.
There were already people who were gentlemen scientists. But I love that line in there, that because of war among the Osage.
Yes.
And I'm sure they didn't know if the Osage were going to be getting weapons from Spain, right? Or like there was all of that proxy war going on all the time.
Yep.
But I love that idea. They changed their plans. They were like, well, there's war among the Osage.
Yeah.
And so we definitely don't want to go.
Yeah. When Zebulon Pike, who was like a very experienced military commander, did go up the Red River a couple years later, he got detained by the Spaniards, so probably was a good idea. So,
right? Yeah, the Spanish imprisoned them. They were nice to them.
Yes.
Yeah, but we won't go into that. But that's another great story.
Yeah.
Hampton Sides in Blood and Thunder, he goes into that pretty well. That book about Kit Carson.
Okay, yeah, I'll check it out.
And Pike and them, they get an impromptu tour of all the way down to Mexico. Just like, but people are nice to them. They're not. They don't brutalize them, but they're not going. They're captured.
Yeah, sort of this careful detente back then, where they're like, we're not going to torture you, but we don't.
Right. Also, you're not leaving.
Yeah, you're not continuing on the expedition you planned. We might take you and show you what we want you to say.
Right. So as we go forward into history, I think it's fascinating that kind of a Jeffersonian concept too. I mean, we think of Jefferson as the yeoman farmer and Jeffersonian democracy and all, but he was very interested in engineering landscapes as well.
Yeah, I
Like
mean, yeah.
like like they were really into messing with the Mississippi quick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know that Jefferson had specific engineering design. I mean, the other thing you mentioned Olivia's essay in Southlands about Wendell Berry, right? Like, and she
Yeah,
mentions this. We're like Jefferson. We associate Jefferson with the philosophy of these yeoman farmers, but he was not clearly not one. He was a slaveholder, right? And so there was always from the moment that I think of like the Louisiana Purchase. It's an important moment in the history of the Mississippi River because even before that, when European cultures came, we had what we've just been talking about, right? Like just this piecemeal, different people, because the French were here, the Spanish were here, the English were here. It was hard for anyone to really do anything because they were always having wars and proxy wars. And all of a sudden in 1803, you only have one empire. And that opens the possibility for this. But that empire, because of Jefferson, had embedded within it these sort of like deeply contradictory ideas where he I think really in some ways believed like part of the reason why we need all this land west of the Mississippi River was like he did believe democracy depended on people kind of rolling out and being self-sufficient and living on their own land. And so we might want more land for that. But on the flip side, he was also wedded with the plantation economy. He was a planter and sort of like wound up facilitating the expansion of that kind of stuff, right? Like before anything in the Louisiana Purchase was of any use to a human farmer already. Yeah, we got these guys down in Natchez that are snapping up huge parcels of land and setting the stage for engineering the Mississippi River because they're going to need levees to stop the flooding and they're going to need steamboats to carry their cotton in a way that might not have been true if we actually built this empire of smallholders that Jefferson sometimes talked about.
right. That's a fascinating idea when you
Yeah.
think about the contradictions
Yep.
and how so clearly and again in your book you're not making this argument at all. This is the history. It devolved into feudalism and plutocracy, that what we did around the Mississippi, as fast as anything I've ever seen. Like
Yeah.
it was
And
like it was a default setting.
yeah, and I mean, like, I'm tempted to say that, like, what else could it be, right? Because you look at a place like, again, the Mississippi Delta is a confusing word, and I've used it multiple ways, but not the Delta down here where I live now in Louisiana, but that big floodplain up in Mississippi. It was so swampy that like commercial scale farming kind of depended on someone being so rich that they could afford to cut down all these trees and make it happen. And so like there can be this sense of inevitability of like, of course, slavery and massive sprawling plantations came here. But on the flip side of that, I think one thing I try and make clear in the book of like, Jefferson didn't see it this way, but the Choctaw that lived in that area were kind of pretty close to the yeoman farmer. Right? They had a little bit of a hunter gatherer in them, and that they would go out and chase deer, or even before that, bison. But they like managed to find ways to live in and around these floodplains where they could have kind of small farming communities, but it was more communal rather than individual people. Right? It was like whole
Right.
villages of people together. So. Feudalism wasn't inevitable, but if you like brought in Western capitalism in any form, it kind of devolved to feudalism really fast in that landscape.
Yeah, and you may not know the answer to this, but you have a character in there, William Dockery,
Mm-hmm.
who is an early planter, kind of a hard scrabble guy who gets some capital.
Yep.
But he talks about there being 15 to 20 foot blue cane expanses on the river bottoms,
Yep.
and the soil beneath it rich as cream.
Right.
So is that the old fields though that the natives that the natives had planted and then let them go back to cane when they were exhausted? Or do you know?
Presumably, yeah. I don't know. Like that's just a line from Docker, and like the thing is, Docker was almost 100 years later, right? He's writing in the 1880s, and this is post
Okay,
Civil
gotcha.
War. And it's just important in that to remember how, despite the fact that like this plantation stuff came in immediately, it still took a really long time before the Mississippi Delta at large, right? The Bolivar County where I used to live, that's where Dockery's plantation was. It took almost 100 years before anyone could get that far along. And so that's a line from Dockery's, the blue cane, the soil rich as cream. That's from some letters or diaries he wrote. So I don't know specifically where. I mean, he was along the banks of the Sunflower River, but generally, yeah, the river cane in these areas sprouted most of all in places where indigenous people previously had farms, right? Like the
Had farms,
soils, right? Like
right?
it was floodplain farming, and they knew how to pick sites where like maybe some years it wasn't going to work because it'd be a big river year, but that would bring in natural fertilizer, and so that
Right.
helped with that river cane.
Yeah. I mean, there is a blueprint for living, like Aldo Leopold's quote: "The oldest task of man, I think, which he never has accomplished, was to live on a piece of land without spoiling it."
Yep.
And I think like even Leopold would say that once the numbers were probably lower, but the Cherokee, the Choctaw, they did that pretty well for a long time
Yeah, I've done
comparatively.
comparatively. I think you look at the longer history of North America, and you're like, wow, like when people first arrived in North America, they really wiped out a lot of species.
Right.
But then something happened, and people kind of figured it out. And by the time, so like the cultures that Europeans encountered, I think, and I read about this a little bit in terms of Cahokia, both ecologically, but like politically, I think people had real like taken some careful time and thought about like, do we want royalty or not? Do we want
Mm-hmm.
to like over harvest or not? And cultures by and large settled on an idea of like, let's have smaller populations and lived in more dispersed ways, and let's think about the landscape or like animals, but not just the animals, like the river, the landscape. Think about them as kin, and think about them, yeah, as things that we have obligations to, and they have obligations to us. And yeah, as close as anyone's ever figured out how to live without spoiling a place, that was what was happening here when white people showed up.
Right. I think that's true of the Creek country in Alabama,
Yeah.
and South Georgia. Um, so could you give a reader or a listener, like what people found, like before they did the drain, and you have the part two is the American River, half horse, half alligator, and I love that part of that. What people found was, I mean, those what we see as these huge monotonous cropland expanses now were swamp, were forest,
Right.
or seasonally inundated forest, right?
Yeah.
And
So, yeah, again, so like the floodplain, the thing that's hard for people to wrap their head around talking about like the greatness of the Great River is the scale of the floodplain on the lower Mississippi River. So the lower Mississippi River starts at the very bottom of Illinois. That's where the Ohio comes in. The Missouri has already come in. And so it's like you've taken all of these rivers from more than 1 million square miles and put them together and made this giant river. And there's places where, so the floodplain, people probably know this, but it's like right, every year or two, the river's going to come up. We're going to have more snow melt. The river's going to go over its banks. It's going to spread out. Natural space where it stores that water. The floodplain on the lower Mississippi River can be 90 miles wide in some places, right? And that's what, like, there's some quotes in the book of Hernando de Soto kind of experiencing all of a sudden this giant inland sea. And within that 90-mile wide corridor at the bottom of the continent, so you'd have this big river at the middle of it, but then around the river in the floodplain, you'd have cypress forest and oak forest, and you'd have all these ridges, and you'd have ridges built by the river. They're pretty low, but even a foot or two, right, really changes the plant ecology. You'd get oxbow lakes because the river would shift its channel, and so there's a lake over here that used to be a part of the river. You just get all these different kinds of backwaters, and it's just a tremendously rich place, like rich in protein, if you want to get in the most functional sense, like the amount of life here from waterfowl to river shrimp to actual shrimp when you get down on the coastline. One thing I like, this kind of blew my mind when I learned it. There's a lot of indigenous cultures tell the story of grandmother, and she's the woman who taught farmers how to raise crops, because most indigenous farmers were women. And the stories are told, I think, in the Dakotas, far away, but wherever the stories of grandmother are told, she lives on an island at the mouth of the Mississippi River. It's this recognition that it's this incredibly vibrant, rich landscape. And so we've lost most of that. 90% of that old floodplain is cut down, and like you said, turned into these giant farms that you see. That, you know, like if you think about, I don't know where people would see them, maybe something associated with blues music or something like that. But these cotton fields that stretch on and on and on. Everywhere you see those in the south, in this part of the South, it used to be this giant, beautiful swamp.
right, you also mentioned, if you've ever watched Walk the Line, that
Yep.
Johnny Cash. So Johnny Cash was born on one of those New Deal colonies.
Yes.
And as I remember, that movie opens with the expanse of that flat cotton.
I believe that. Yeah, we're like, oh brother, where art thou? Kind of set. There's like a lot of cultural touchstones in the modern Delta, and it's hard even for me, like who's written this book. It's sometimes hard to really envision what preceded that because it
Right.
like this cotton field delta is such an iconic American space in its own right.
Right, for sure. And I'd spent some time in the Amazon Delta when I was young, and they call that the Varzea, and it's seasonally inundated forest for like, I mean, people live on these in these houses that are 20, 30, 20 feet in the air,
Right.
and then they have all their canoes and stuff tied up. And
Yep.
then when I was there wasn't any water. Like
Interesting. Yeah.
you go down a bunch of steps, but the rest of the time they live and they work their land way off by
Yep.
boat. And that's what it looked like. I mean,
Yeah.
it
You
was
probably have a better, as good a sense of anyone what the Mississippi River used to look. I mean, you can see the
I
ecology.
didn't know
There's,
it at the time.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me, I mean, the thing is, I just said like it's hard for me to picture, but on the flip side, that I told you this long canoe trip that I did in 2017, and we would, whenever we could, we'd get off the main channel and go through these back channels. And sometimes the Mississippi River levees are 10 to 14 miles apart, and that's the place where you can still experience this. If you get back, you see a diminished version of what used to be there. But that's what, and I want more people to go out and canoe and fish on the Mississippi River to kind of realize just
Yeah.
what we used to have.
Well, yeah, reading that, it made me really want to go see, like catch what was left.
Yeah.
Or not even that. It's like I don't like these ideas of things because we're talking about time,
Right.
and this is one eyelash blink of the Mississippi River's time.
Yes.
That we've had it enchained.
Yeah. Yeah.
The front cover of the book, if anybody hasn't seen those pictures of the LiDAR thing of the Mississippi River, where it's got all those thousands of channels everywhere in different colors.
Right.
I was just looking at this. There's a house for sale in West Helena, Arkansas, for like $49,000. And I'm always looking for somewhere that costs some $49,000 or less. And on Google Earth, you can see those oxbows. Or if you just go to West Helena on Google Earth,
yep,
all of that appears, and you can see where the river was.
It's an interesting thing because, like I said, the iconic image of the cotton fields is so iconic, right? It's so imprinted on our minds. But as I learned the geological history of the river, I would like look at Google Maps just when I'm driving back roads in Mississippi, and you'd be like, oh, you can kind of see these fields curve, and like you can really start to. It's not legible at all until you know a little bit, and then you have a little geology, and then all of a sudden the landscape there becomes, and like its geological history becomes so apparent and hard to ignore.
Yeah, it gives you kind of a humility, really. I was one of the great stories in here was it Shreve that removed the timber from that? Is it the red? What do you know about that story?
Yeah. So Shreve is like the first great engineer, and he's funny because like now these days you think of the Army Corps of Engineers as being sort of these. They're West Point types. They're the like more intellectual end of the military, perhaps. But Henry Shreve was just this like blustery frontiersman guy, was just smashing his way through stuff. And so, the biggest challenge on the Mississippi River early on was just there's all kinds of deadwood in it, right? And you'd run your boat aground and maybe sink and possibly drown. And the worst of all was it was called the Red River Raft, and I don't have the numbers, but it was I think like 100+ miles of the Red River was basically you could walk across it because there were so many trees had gathered over so many thousands of years, and there's like forests growing on top of the deadwood that's floating on the river, just like this incredible morass that was like formed its own ecology, right?
Yeah.
But this was the kind of American idea of the era, right? We talked about Jefferson and this feudalism of like people were just like, I need land, so because I need money, I need cotton plantations, and so they looked and they said we got to find a way to get those logs out of that river so that we can send boats up that river and we can start putting plantations up that way. And Shreve made this kind of crazy boat contraption that would, like slam into these trees that were lodged together to shake them loose, and then he'd drag them on board and cut them up, and it was an incredible multi-year project to work his way through. There's kind of always like he'd work his way through, and then he'd leave for the winter, and some trees would rebuild. He finally got there, and then Shreveport is named for him because he was wise enough to invest in it himself, and said, "I'm going to buy some land up that way." So,
yeah, it's amazing. It's an incredible all of this is hubris.
Yes,
right, but there's also this very I love that. So when we were talking about Jefferson, we're talking about hubris, we're talking about like wildlife refuges too. So much of the book is a kind of a snapshot of American contradiction.
Yeah.
And so much of that plantation economy was built on federal tax dollars for the drainage districts. I just was like, I swear, I was just blown away by the revelations of dependency.
Yeah.
And like,
And
I
then
mean,
the way they talk about welfare for the people who work on their farm, right? Like just this obvious contradiction.
it's
And
tough.
there's a great story. I don't think I put this in the book, but like William Faulkner, right, is in Mississippi, and he spent a lot of time hunting in the Delta, and he got asked once to speak to the Delta Council, and the Delta Council is kind of like the chamber of commerce for this giant region, but it represents the planters, the plantation owners. And he was, I think historians are like, I can't remember the lines, but he's kind of like talking about government handouts and this and that. And he did it in this sort of sly way where like people are like, no, he's talking about the planners, but the planners, it went over their heads. And they thought he was talking about sort of the poor black people that lived around there. But
Right. Yeah. It's a big American story. That one.
Yes. Yeah.
And that drainage district stuff, because Des Moines, the city of Des Moines, the waterworks, they just sued the upstream drainage districts
Yep.
for dumping so much nitrate pollution in that they can't provide the clean drinking water now. And I didn't know what a drainage district was until I was reading your book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, so who exactly is the object of this lawsuit, right? I was, and you have to know what a drainage district is first.
Right. Which I guess we should say is like a quasi governmental, right? It's like basically a collection of landowners that pay in to sustain water infrastructure that like moves water so that it keeps their fields dry. So they make,
Right.
I mean, and once you know that, you like drive in certain places and you'll see on the map like ditch number 3, or you're just like, wow, there's a whole lot of very linear creeks in this area. And you're like, that's because they're not creeks, they're drainage ditches that
Right.
like someone had to accumulate the money and power to build that. And so yeah, it's these collectives of landowners working together to get that done.
So I was speaking of Faulkner, I had to do a long project on the bear. Mm-hmm. And that's great. Faulkner's great metaphor, right, of the falling of the end of the forest.
Yep.
The whatever that bear's name is, that they pursue all the time. That is an incredible snapshot. The book made me want to go back and read the bear.
The bear. I mean, you should get the. There's a collection. I think it's called Big Woods, because it contains, right, because the bears and Go Down Moses, but there's like a slightly more accessible standalone version, and there's some like I forget the other, but there are other short stories that are in sequence with the bear. It's like some of the same. I think it's Ike again 40, 50 years later, kind of at the tail end of the Delta has all been cleared. And so, yeah, I think Faulkner has some of the more compelling writing. And that this stuff was super important to me in writing this book, is like I wanted to read not just the history, but I needed to look at the artists and literary figures that had experienced this place, because I think there's often wisdom in their rendering that can help us see a place better.
Well, there's things you can do with art and metaphor that you can't do with pure fact.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think both are, like, if you're going to try to fix something, you want to have a manual of how fact.
Right.
If you want to understand why you're fixing it, maybe you go to the art, right?
Yes, exactly.
But I was so let's talk a little bit about James Buchanan Eads before we move forward. He was obsessed with understanding the way the river worked, right?
Yeah,
is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm one of many people that was obsessed with how the river worked, right? You mentioned hubris, and I'm like, to me, it's part talking not just about Eads yet, but generally, it's not just hubris. It's just this failure to recognize the river as a being on its own terms, right? Like it's always in the American years, it's always something to measure. It's like it's a set of phenomena and behaviors that we are like, yeah, if we just measure it, we can control it. And so Eads was one of many engineers that was just like, he was hubristic. He believed that he could learn the behaviors to the extent that he could absolutely predict what the river was going to do. And he had some reason for some of this was in John Barry's book too, that we mentioned before, Rising Tide, right? These incredible quotes. He kind of invented diving bells himself because he figured there was going to be some money to be made from these shipwrecks of steamboats that sunk on the Mississippi River. So he's like, I got to figure out a way to get down there on the river bottom. And just in some of these letters, there's just this incredible description of him dropping down, 40, 50 feet into the Mississippi River to try and reach the river bottom. And they're not even really being a bottom because the mud is, it's like a little bit of mud swirling past you and then more mud and more mud. It's like hard to figure out when you've actually hit the bottom. And so John Barry makes a lot of that really effectively in his book of like how seeing that was this sort of, despite his hubris, I think like he had this material knowledge of the Mississippi River that was almost more than scientific. It was just like he could understand its chaos in a way. And so Eads went on to do all kinds. Like he made the first bridge to cross the Mississippi River that was south of the Missouri River. So it's like when it starts to get really big, it was hard to build a bridge. And Eads kind of understood how you could do that by sinking things down into this crazy river bottom. And then later he had a very, very smart ideas about what to do. There's some problems at the mouth of the river. It was kind of filling up and it was hard to get ships in. And he had ideas about how to build these jetties that could kind of very elegantly let the river deepen itself. And so he did quite a bit up and down the river and quite a bit for here in New Orleans. New Orleans was struggling in this era in the late 19th century. And he kind of reopened that port and kicked off a new era of engineering in the Mississippi River, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was fascinated because I've been to the I'm spacing out on the names. All the jetties at the mouth.
Yep.
For fishing.
Yeah. South Pass probably.
Yeah, and it's just dangerous there. Like it's wild there.
Yeah. It's beautiful though. I mean, that's
incredibly beautiful, but
we went down South Pass, went on that canoe trip and camped at a little island at the very bottom, which was incredible.
And you did that in a canoe? Was it perilous?
I never know. I mean, like it was a giant canoe, right? Like John he has some canoes that he buys. He also hand makes these like 30-foot long canoes. So we were in these bigger canoes where there's a little more control. John has been, by the time I met him, he'd been canoeing on the Mississippi River for 20 years. And so he knows what he's doing. And I was able to very often just give myself over to him and trust that I was safe because he knew what to do. So
yeah, what a place. I mean, talk about mystery and crazy dynamism.
Yes.
We would go Crevalle. Just for fun, right? You'd throw against those jetties.
Yep.
And the Crevalle would be in there. And then there would just be these bull sharks would appear in that wash.
I believe that. Yeah.
Just these heads that were like, 2 feet wide.
Yeah. The very bottom of the river, I think, is just this crazy world. Where there's always been a little bit of sport fishing too, but even today it's like hard to get there. And there's a place called Port Eads that's named after Eads, which is sort of like the last place on the river. And it's not even a place, it's sort of a platform where the land is mostly given way. And I can't remember, but like I remember when we canoed there, we like went in and they had like a little marine shop where we could buy Cokes and this and that. And it felt like a moon base, the first moon base anyone ever built, like very rough, but they would charge sport fishermen incredible amounts of money to come stay in this incredibly rustic place because it was so hard to get to and this wilderness right there at the bottom of Louisiana. Yeah.
And all of it's right there when you wake up in the morning versus having to travel there.
Yeah. Spend an hour or two in a boat getting there.
Right.
You're right there. So,
right. Well, so moving back up river, and when you talk about the Delta, you talk about clear Missouri Boot Hill, clear down, right?
Yeah, I mean the Delta's a confusing word that way, right? Because they're like the actual right, like people. There's the Mississippi Delta, as in like the land where the blues was born, and that is one thing. That's where I used to live, and then there's the River Delta, which is like what people often think that's New Orleans, that's Louisiana marshes. And there's this weird, so technically, like a geologist would say, actually up in Helena, Arkansas or Cleveland, Mississippi, that's not a delta. That's not a river delta at all. That is an alluvial valley of the Mississippi, right? That's the floodplain of the alluvial valley. But somehow people, to me, the fact that people talk about the Arkansas Delta, the Mississippi Delta up there, to me, it reflects the fact that the landscape was so intuitively belonged to the lower Mississippi River and was like even connected to New Orleans in these obvious, it was all this giant swampy morass that people kind of like dragged that Delta name further north. And so, at this point, culturally, there is a version of the Delta that is from the Boot Hill of Missouri all the way down.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Which is the whole lower Mississippi River.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have there's a great piece in there about some of the introduction of the sharecropping and the really feudalism. There's
Right.
an incredible line in there where Alan Lomax is down there. If people don't know who Alan Lomax was, he was collected all the great blues singers of his time.
Right.
I mean, those recordings are absolutely astounding. Um, and anyway, he has to get permission to drive on a public road across a plantation there.
Yeah, yeah. Lomax's notes. He came down hunting blues songs, but it was like Waldo Levee was being built in one of its more intense periods, and so it's these incredible. It winds up being this great ethnography of that, and so he talks about that, and it was sort of like right like slavery is its own form of feudalism, right? But after emancipation, there was a lot of chaos for a little bit, but as tends to happen, like where the rich white guys eventually started to get their land back, or they held on to their land, but they were in this situation where post Civil War they had a whole lot of land, but not a whole lot of money, and they didn't have free labor anymore. And so what do they do? And that's kind of that. This is, I'm sure, an economic historian would call this a simplification, but that's kind of where it came from in my mind. Of like they needed a system where they didn't have to pay people anything and could get them working. And so sharecropping was like, yeah, come, you can build a house. You can have this little plot of land that you work. And you're going to I'll give you a little bit up front, like the house or some other things like that. But ultimately your paycheck's going to come at the end of the year when we get the cotton crop in. You'll get your share of the crop. But that structure kind of allowed them to charge them for room and board, like just milk them for everything they could find. And so ultimately paid them very little, kept them alive and did not much more.
I was amazed because it's like a boa constrictor. Like it starts out at the end of the Civil War, say in 67, 68, where they have to come up with a system, right?
Right.
Like, and the system probably until the federal troops left in 79 probably wasn't that exploitative.
Yeah.
But by the time, like in your book, like I was blown away by this. Like one, that cotton is a perfect crop because your tenants, your sharecroppers, they can't eat it.
Exactly. Yeah.
They can't run their own livestock in it. Right. They can't eat your cattle either. But mostly they have to buy food from you.
Right. Yeah. and it's your land, right? So you can be like, no, like you're working my land, but it's my land, and I decide what you plant, and you can only plant cotton. So
right. And it was the boa constrictor was just getting tighter and tighter on the people.
Yeah.
And I come from a place where I knew people when I was really young who were white sharecroppers too. And they were the same. It was the same system. They were, they were buying from the company store and being in debt at the end of the season. And
I think the blackness of the sharecroppers in the Mississippi Delta, there were white sharecroppers in Mississippi too, but in a weird way, it had a reputation. Like there was this constant flow through where people would come out of the hill country. They'd come out of Alabama and they'd hear the Mississippi Delta, right? I'm not going to go into geology again, but go to this land of the blues. And like, that was the place where maybe sharecropping would finally work, because people actually did sometimes get paid more sharecropping there because it was better land to sharecrop than up in the hills. And so they'd come in, there's just like black people would flock in hoping to make a living. They'd stay for a couple of years and then they'd get tired of depression and feudalism and they'd hop on a train and ride up to Chicago. But then another black family would fill that gap immediately. And so it's just this weird pipeline of people flowing through.
Yeah. I love that note was like the landowner even sold them crop insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, if the boa constrictor gets pretty tight,
it does get pretty tight.
Towards the end.
One of the lessons of the Mississippi River is smart, wealthy people are going to find a way to get paid and paid more and more and more. So.
Right. Yeah. And while using as much federal resources as they could.
Yes.
I mean, it's not really an indictment either. It's really a portrait of the human behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
To maximize your share.
Yep.
And I love that part, the way the book is written in that way. There's no it's not an outrage. This is simply the way it is. And it wasn't great for a lot of people.
Right.
But it is.
Yeah, and it makes me think a lot about, we've talked about the Jefferson ideal of independent. And I love the idea of self-sufficiency and private property is great in many ways. Like I dream of having my own parcel of land, but looking at the Mississippi River, like I talk a lot these days about thinking like a watershed, and writing this book forced me to think like a watershed. And you're talking about Des Moines and the upstream districts and this and that. And like the idea of private property doesn't fit with how watersheds work, right? Because like you can't, any single parcel of land is connected and entangled with everything else within the watershed. And so just some of this is this idea of private property and taking care of yourself and your own just doesn't match with the way the natural world functions.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like there's a mouthful right there.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about without the levee. So if you look at that cover photo on your book,
Yep.
Or cover graphic, also private property is taken by the river every year.
Right.
And as we saw in Wax Lake Delta, the Atchafalaya, right, that it's added to.
Yep.
Right.
I remember
downstream.
talking about this once. Like the Army Corps has this, so they do this thing called mat sinking. Basically, they like, the simple way I put it is they pave the sides of the Mississippi River because they want to keep it from eroding. They just lay down these like big pieces of concrete out there. And the way you have to do that is take this big boat out on the river every year. And I got a tour of this years ago, very early on in my research. And I was talking to the guy in charge of it. And I was kind of just starting to edge at some of these issues. And he made this argument. I don't know, like there's some argument he made there of like, oh, like this is good for the land, right? Because if we didn't pave these concretes, then the forest would get washed away. I'm like, well, it's good for the guy who owns that forest, but the forest is supposed to get washed. It's supposed to be dynamic. It's supposed to change. There's this notion of like, for land must be static, and it's just not a place where land is ever static. It's just always changing. And that's one of the tensions that comes up again and again through the book. It's like we keep trying to, in many ways, freeze time on the Mississippi River and say like, we want the Mississippi River to look like the way we want it to look, like what we encountered when we first found it, we again being sort of white European settler, whatever you want to call it. And it just doesn't work that way. It's a thing that has to change over time. And that's what these early indigenous people, I think you're describing what you encountered in the Amazon. Like there's the sense of like, no, we have to change the way we live to adapt to the river's whims. You can't adapt the river to the way you want to live. It's just not going to work long term.
Right, not without incredible sacrifice.
Exactly.
And the billions of dollars that we poured into it to try to do that.
Yes.
There's stuff in here I won't go too deep so we don't stay all day.
We go forever.
One of the things that happens here, there's kind of a turning point after the American River. The Big Green Wall part of your book is where the levees are being built. But then the 27 flood comes, and really that's the place where we decide that engineering is correct me if I'm wrong. The 27 flood becomes a turning point,
I think the 27 flood is an interesting thing, and I would be remiss not to know, like next year's the 100th anniversary of that flood, right? And it's like a seminal event in American history in so many ways. Like it influenced blues music and it influenced flood control policy, like from wonky history to popular history. It's there. And so I encourage people to like start reflecting on it more. But there's different ways you can talk about it. So after the 1927 flood, before the 1927 flood, you mentioned Eads before. There was sort of this Eads associated. A bunch of people in Eads' era were like, I think we should just build levees, right? And so there was this era of the levees only policy. And the idea was like, the way we're going to contain the Mississippi River is just squeezing it between these walls. And then the 1927 flood happened. And it was kind of like, well, that doesn't work. And one way you can interpret so after the 1927 flood, there's this it's called the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project, this new federal flood control system on the river. And it has these outlets. And so there are places down here in the South where we can kind of open up gates on the river and move water out of it. And so you could possibly look at the 1927 flood as the moment we kind of woke up and said like, oh, we're going to be smarter about this and like let the river do what it wants to do. But I tend to think of it not as that, but as the moment where we're like, well, levees only doesn't work, but like engineering is still, it's sort of like this weird slight shift in direction, but also intensification. And like the levees are only bigger and stronger now than they were before the 1927 flood. We just happen to also do these other things. Like I think there's a moment where we're really committed to making the river into a machine. It was just a more intricate and complicated machine that we thought that could suffice. And I don't think, like, should be obvious at this point, but I don't think that's going to suffice forever. Right? Like we could build as many gates and levees as we want, but eventually the river's going to outlast us and do what it wants to do.
Right. and as it has.
Yes.
I mean that cover graphic is just like after you really absorb or look at it Google Earth,
Right.
after you really absorb how often it changes.
Yeah.
That and you and I talked about this before, but when McPhee wrote Atchafalaya, he said the delta, the bird's foot, the lower delta, had moved back and forth across the Gulf Coast like a man playing a piano with one hand.
Right.
And that's an incredible image that I've never gotten.
Yeah, that one comes up all the time. That he also talks about like a fire hose, where it's like to explain the physics of like, well, if you just like put your hose down on the ground and turn it on and crank it all the way, it's going to flail back and forth, and that's kind of what, right. So what the Mississippi River did down here, and I think that like, right. So I want people to picture it, because we have the river now. The river kind of juts out. There's 90 miles of river after New Orleans, and it kind of sticks out in the Gulf of Mexico, and so that's one sub delta, and it just built it. If it was left to its own devices, it would have left this sub delta behind and would have started building one somewhere else. And it did. This isn't a clock, but it would do this every 1,000-ish years or so. And again, I keep coming back to the indigenous stuff, but we look at these earthwork sites that I talked about, and they would be built all kind of every 1,000 years or so, right? Like there was just this knowledge previously of people were able to think on these longer timescales. Poverty Point that I talked about, I think they were working on it for 300 years, and we're at the 250th anniversary of America, right? So these sites were longer; they existed for longer periods in the country, and so we picture the Mississippi River now as like we could put it on a map, and it makes these wavy lines, but those lines are just nothing compared to like both the river's own history, but also, again, that even humans in the 14,000, 12,000 years that humans have lived along the lower Mississippi River, they were humans that were able to think about this in a bigger scale than we are now.
Right. And probably, I'm reading Paul Kingsnorth right now, Against the Machine.
Yeah.
And he goes back and talks about when people begin to feel themselves as separate from the rest of the creation, if you will. And at that, and he goes all back to the Garden of Eden story, right? But at some point, people left that and embraced this abstraction that the people were at the top of the chain and could command. He goes into Francis. I love this quote from Francis Bacon, which was that in order for nature to be commanded, it must first be obeyed.
Yeah, and I do like that.
And it's great, right? But he also points out, Kingsnorth points out the difficulty in Francis Bacon was one of the first people, one of the leaders of the Enlightenment, who said, well, we're going to command it.
Right.
And before that, in these older religions, the people didn't spend a lot of time trying to command the world. They lived more within the fabric of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to keep meaning to get my hands on that Kingsnorth book, and I haven't, because I'd be curious as someone who, as I understand it, identifies as Christian, Kingsnorth. I mean, like I one of the pivot points I think of is Christianity, and there's some people that kind of critique Christianity as whole as like a religion that inherently sets things that way. Yeah, exactly. I also think about agriculture, right? Like it's like the Garden of Eden story is, you can read it as a parable about agriculture, and that agriculture is this less the beginning of civilization and more a punishment that we got cast out of like living amongst earth. I think this is thinking about other projects of mine out in the future, but like it's really interesting to me to think about animal agriculture, because like in North America there was agriculture before Europeans arrived, but very few in either of the Americas there was very little animal agriculture. And so like, what do you decide to domesticate and not domesticate? And it's just really intriguing to me that the line here in these societies that we've already talked about that seem to have developed some kind of wise way of coexisting with things said like, yeah, well, we can grow beans and melons and corn and all that, but we're not going to take a bison and try and turn it into a domestic creature. We're going to let the animals run free. So.
Right. And there's a huge jump there.
Yeah.
I know Dick Manning up here, Richard Manning, he's written a lot about like the origins of agriculture and how that changed people's minds and their and then Yuval Harari took a lot of that.
People should check out James C. Scott's what is the book? Against the Grain is another good book that gets into some of the stuff.
You bet. So Richard Manning was that. I think that's Against the Grain, the original one. But he was the first person to awake my eyes to this. and and there's some folks that think that the height of human intelligence was slightly prior to the invention of agriculture, right? Or
Yeah, I
people.
mean, there's a lot of strong arguments that way. Like when you look at, I mean, when you look at it on paper, it looks like a nice life. And I know, I mean, you spend more time hunting and fishing than I do. The weird thing is, I'm like, it looks like a nice life, but I'm not. There's something interesting of like, well, I say that, but here I am in my sort of fancy office with all this stuff. Like it's a hard choice to make to once you're in the modern world to acknowledge, yeah, those hunter gatherers had someone figure it out, but I'm not going to teleport myself back to it necessarily.
No, not by choice. And
Yeah.
there's a King's North line in there where he says the do what thou wilt is more of a modern concept, like Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
But thy will be done is more what people did up until
Interesting.
the modern person, right? Because
Yeah.
that will there may be currents, there may be a fish run, the bison may show up,
Right.
they may not, right?
Right.
So it's a weather change in human perception,
Yeah.
of oneself.
Yeah, in our position and things. Yeah.
And I don't think that person would have built those levees or cut that channel through.
Yes.
Right. That's a modernist idea of engineering that a river as wild as the Mississippi or any other creek.
Right.
So I was just fascinated with so the third of your book, it kind of explodes into I love the Mark Twain part where the steamships and everything were their own culture. But we get on into the unmaking, and the third part of your book is the unmade.
Right.
And I was blown away by the references to early on of if the frost don't come, you defoliate the cotton so you can harvest it, right? And that was a poison I'd never even heard of.
Yeah, the stories of the poisons in the Mississippi Delta, these farm feel like just like these pictures of 50 people passed out on the lawn when the first crop dusters were coming through. They were pretty grim. So
yeah, it's amazing, like origin story of better living through chemistry.
Yeah,
or better, and just like better dying through chemistry too.
When it allowed this accumulate, like it lets me see. I loved living in the Mississippi Delta, and I loved like driving through these soybean fields and things like that. But then when I learned this history, I'm like, well, this is like there used to be a deeply biodiverse swamp in this place, and now we have one species over 10,000 acres that is genetically engineered. And I'm not necessarily opposed to all genetic engineering, but it's like, sure. But it is a human created crop that is kept alive from chemicals and poison, and it's the only species that we're allowing on these 10,000 acres, except for like a few weeds and rabbits that creep in. And you're just like, that is really sad in its own way. So
yeah. Well, yeah. One of and there's just not a lot of food.
No, not at all
coming out of there, which was interesting to me. And the soybean,
and it's hard to grab. I mean, like the few black landowners and farmers left are often the ones most interested in that food for good reason. Because if you're a small farmer, you get the premium on food. You can like make a lot more per acre, but they have trouble growing it because the cotton and soybean is now engineered so that there are specific herbicides you can spray on the fields, and it kills off the weeds. But the genetic engineering is basically just to make these magic beans that can't get killed by the herbicide. And so you get these airplanes dumping poisons on vast fields. And then the little black farmer next door is like, well, I'm trying to grow sweet potatoes, but then poisons come over here and there is no sweet potato that's genetically engineered to protect against this. And so
wow,
structurally, you can't get, it's very hard to like, again, like there's other challenges to that make it hard. It's just like this place is so entrenched in the row crop economy that it's hard to shift to something else. So there's people that talk about it and think about it as like a valuable future in a lot of different ways, but the challenges are immense.
Yeah, and the federal the farm bill has not so far been engineered to inspire innovation in that. We could use the same amount of money that we're paying for all of this insurance and all this stuff to. I mean, one of my big things is if you could create local food security at the county level,
right,
to the extent possible.
Right.
I'm not talking about pie in the sky or growing bananas in North Dakota. I'm just talking about to the extent possible. Man, I think it would come with its own problems,
Yep.
ramifications, but
I mean,
I
yeah, I
just
think, yeah, I agree. I don't know. This is jumping to like other projects, like, but I'm like going back to some of the animal domestication. I'm like, well, these should be public good, right? Like, why doesn't a county have its own cow herd and its own
right.
community owned slaughterhouse, and like they distribute the meat that like it's just, we spend so much government money propping up certain things, and like, why don't we just like spend less money propping up different things and just
Right.
distribute more food to people? But
Right. I mean,
yeah,
given it is kind of a food desert,
yeah,
that country, it's harder to get good produce that you
yes,
could you could grow right down the street.
right.
Um, that's why one reason I was looking at that West Helena Google Earth stuff.
Well, I
Um,
got I know some houses over there that I can sell. And on the other side of the river, there's some real estate. But
so I want to talk about Death Alley and the final couple of parts of the book,
yeah,
without doing any spoilers. But like, it seemed to me that cotton spraying in the 50s or whatever that kind of gave rise to Delta Airlines,
hmm,
um, which that's a fascinating fact.
yeah. That's people don't. The name is because the company it originally was like an agricultural company where they just had their airplanes so they could spray chemicals on fields, and as they grew and grew, they turned into the giant we know today. So yeah, it
Yeah.
used to be headquartered in Monroe, Louisiana.
Uh-huh. Is it still?
I know. I
No.
can't imagine. Having been through Monroe, I'm like, no, there's
Moroni, yeah.
no
Yeah.
American Airlines office left there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, so we're talking about the challenges faced by an engineered river and the consolidation of land and assets there. And we're looking at I'm thinking about the great unraveling
yep,
is part of the book, but we have Death Alley, they call it Cancer Alley downstream, which used to be called America's Rhine. You
yes.
know,
So many
and
nicknames for that stretch of river.
yeah, but do you see a way forward? Like after I know you said you served on some advisory board recently or consultant board. Um,
Yeah, well, let me back up and talk
uh,
first. Make sure people know what cancer like. So this is the kind of strip of river between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, so just upstream of me where I'm sitting here, and it has become heavily industrialized. Basically, like the oil industry was like, well, this is a great place to put our refineries because there was 1927 flood. We built those levees, and then all of a sudden, the kind of those levees were protecting sugar fields down here, and then the sugar economy kind of collapsed, and so there was real estate available that was being protected by federally funded flood protection, and so people were like, let's build industry here, and so that is this strip of river. It's funny because there's really beautiful bucolic areas. You'll be driving just through beautiful countryside, majority black communities, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, now I'm in hell. like industrial hell. It's just this giant city of steam pipes, and there's literal flames coming out of the top, and it's just a crazy landscape, and just really, it's called Cancer Alley because the pollution from these facilities, the facilities are often wedged up against majority black communities, or often all black communities, and the health outcomes in these communities are horrible because they're alongside just these places spewing out carcinogens. And so again, what was the question? What is the future for this place?
no, let's stay with that. Like how we got there.
Yeah.
And it's there's a failure there of what we expect of governance because, as I say a lot, you could have that industry. You just have to hold them to a standard that doesn't poison people.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, it's just like it's hard. It would hard. I think it'd be hard to build the kind of facilities that we need to power our life. Like there, in some ways, there is nowhere to put an oil refinery that's good. This is a particularly bad place because so many people live alongside it. But I just shared most of the history. I think the one thing, the extra layer to understand was like the land use pattern in this place would be like big white owned plantation, little clustered village of the black people whose ancestors were slaves on that plantation and now maybe work on the farm there, right? And then another giant property. And when the oil companies came in, they're going to buy the big property. They're not going to buy out the little village. And so all of a sudden,
Oh
these
wow!
little black villages that used to be alongside sprawling sugar fields are now there. That's why they're so pressed up against these. And it's just this idea for the rest of America. I think a lot of people are like, where else should we put it? And we have to put it somewhere. And these are some of the poor, like not always, but sometimes pretty poor community, right? Just people that don't have the power to stop it. That's changed in the past couple of years. There's been some really, really powerful community activism. And like right now, lately, the transition's been like, as oil is there's less of a future of oil as a fuel. These places are being converted into sort of chemical or plastic production facilities. But community members have stopped some of these just by sheer doggedness of just every kind of challenging every permit and doing every march they can. And so that's encouraging in its own way. But it is like when I think about Southlands and the stories we tell, it's one of the places that in some ways led to that magazine, because I felt like when I started writing about the Mississippi River, I came to think of cancer. It's called Cancer Alley. That's what we often call it. Some of the locals embrace that because they want to speak out and say it is such a place that has been so broken by these industries. But it's all like so I pictured it as only a dystopian hell. And then I drove the entire length of the river, both sides. And I was like, it's so beautiful in so many places. And actually there was a push for a while to make a national historic district where it'd say like, look, there's these intact farms that are still left. Let's set them aside and like help preserve that landscape. And that was well underway under the Biden administration, I believe. And then the Trump administration killed it. And so, yeah.
Well, and we don't have room to go into the diversions and the land law stuff, but a question that I would have from you that Cancer Alley, but let's say the economic production of that part of the Mississippi River, it depends on us keeping the passes open in a rapidly falling apart, unraveling landscape down by the Gulf. Am I right or wrong?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I should be more of an expert on sort of like how all of these things move around. I think that, part of the initial appeal of building these facilities on the Mississippi River was, again, the flood control and the access to navigation. I think some of these products, there would be other ways to move, even if navigation falls apart. And I think that there is, I mean, it's funny, but like when I wrote this book, we'd been just having year after year of floods. And then since the book came out, there hasn't been a single bad flood year. And there's been a ton of low water years. And there's real concerns that like, if we keep seeing the low river years like we had, that navigation will not shut down entirely, but there'll be some point in time where the boats can't move on the river because it's so low for a couple months. And then, we can't get into the mechanics of all the land law, but like the landscape down here shifting rapidly because of our engineering and the sea levels rising. And that is making complications for, how we dredge out the river to keep it deep. But I don't know. I am not super worried about that piece. Yeah.
When you travel, like from New Orleans south, that Bird's Foot, they call it, right?
Yeah.
So that is probably, I think that's the most land loss of any place in the world at the moment.
Yeah, some people talk about Terrebonne Parish, which is actually a little bit west of here, because Terrebonne, like it's like down, at least down here. I mean, basically the Mississippi River built all this land, right? Like the hose and the piano playing that we were talking about before. And then we kept it in one place and it can't rebuild that. But there's at least, I mean, there's sort of like, we've slowly put back some of these small places where water comes out. There's a little bit of land building. Terrebonne Parish is between the Atchafalaya River and the Mississippi River, and there's just like no big waterways there. And so but it's like South Louisiana is disappearing faster than anywhere. That's the easiest way to summarize it. It's like this whole stretch is going fast. So.
And with subsidence as well.
So far, sea level rise isn't really an issue. It's just this it's soggy, wet land that sort of compacts under its own weight. And it used to just get replaced because the Mississippi River would dump out more mud, and we haven't. That's part of it. Part of it is oil canals, right? Like when people went out to drill wellheads, they'd make these straight line canals, and those then now salt water comes in those and it poisons the grasses. And so then the canals get wider and wider and wider. So there's just, the story of this Delta is a lot of catastrophes and things that we overlooked and mistakes that we've made.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite stories. I got hooked on it in the 2010 oil spill.
Yeah.
And, where we were staying in the city. And it's just it's not just because it's not an I told you so thing. Like you got to get more with nature, man.
Right.
It's not that. It's just like it's about ecology. When you pull on one thread, you move the whole net.
I think, yeah, and to me lately, I've started to think more and more. I mean, like there are basically studies that have come out. The Louisiana Delta is famous for this, and we talk a lot. Like what we've done to the Mississippi River, what we've done because of oil drilling has made it happen here sooner. But then
Right.
you bring in climate change and sea level rise, and basically the modelers of the world are like, this kind of landscape exists all over the world. And it's not going to keep existing, and that this is again, we're talking about long history. I'm like, there are periods in Earth's history where we get to have river deltas, and there are periods when we do not, and that all depends. Like, is the sea level stable? If the sea level stable, we get to have river deltas because the rivers can build them. And for all of the past 10,000 years of human flourishing, we've it's been an era of river deltas, and that actually has to do right, like some of the first sedentary societies were in places like this delta. This is why this was such a sacred place to so many indigenous people, and so it's going to be an interesting future where like we don't get to have them anymore because the oceans are getting higher, and in the next couple 100 years they're going to be gone, or starting to go, and we're going to have to figure out like so many of the world's people live in deltas, and so much of the world's seafood comes from deltas, and yeah, well, it's going to be an adjustment.
It's going to be fascinating. I think about like the Columbia River Delta, in the Pacific,
Yep.
and but I would say where you're at, where you hit, where you landed in your sojourning life, right, is
Yeah.
one of the most interesting places in the world.
Oh, absolutely. I feel so blessed that I stumbled my way here. I guess I was going to keep stumbling around until I found somewhere fascinating, but I definitely did.
And you've kind of put down roots and just off of Chapatula Street.
Yeah, yeah. I live 2 blocks from the river, and so I can hear the boats going by at night, but cannot see the river because the port's in the way. But no, I own a house. Yeah, this is home. I mean, the poet Gary Snyder talks about like watersheds being the river's true boundaries. Like home for me is the Mississippi River. Home for me is the South. That's why I made Southlands magazine. So this is where I am.
Right. This is
Yeah,
what was on the thing was
nice.
Gary Snyder. For
Yeah.
some reason, I've been on a Gary Snyder kick.
I've been on a little bit of one two thinking of this idea of thinking like a watershed. He kind of forged some of that territory. So
Yeah. Do you have a favorite place that you go in the Delta? Do you get out in that country at all?
I wish I did more often. I mean, I have unmotored vessels are my only personal vessels, so
Gotcha.
I'm slightly limited in how far I can go. I mean, go back to the edge, like the what we're talking about the fence lines and things like that. I still, I mean, my favorite part of the Mississippi River, I think, is up in. I mean, it's hundreds of miles, but you can go from like Rosedale, Mississippi, down to Vicksburg, maybe even down to Natchez. It's just like all of that. It's so quiet and empty and peaceful, and just get out there in a kayak. But here locally, I mean, same that like to understand Louisiana, you got to get off. It can be really ugly by roads because the roads have to be on top of heavily engineered territory, and then you throw yourself in a boat in the water, and you're like, oh yeah, this is really beautiful. But most often, I drive 15 minutes away. Like I said, 2 blocks from the river, but I drive 15 minutes so I can get to a place where I can access the river up by Audubon Park and just kind of drop down in the little Batcher forest that's there and spend some time looking at what shopping carts and other things have washed up down from
Right.
upstream.
The
Yeah,
detritus of man.
exactly.
Did
Yeah.
when you say batcher, that was a word that I'd heard, but I didn't really know what it was. What is it?
Yeah. So the Batcher's the land between the levees, right? It's like
Okay.
it's this funny landscape that only exists in the modern world when you have levees, and that word it comes from batur, right? I don't speak French, but it comes from French. It means like battered lands, basically, and so it's just the leftover land that we still allow to get hit by the Mississippi River, and that's where I always love to wander.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was always I love New Orleans. Like I was telling you, I go back. My parents had their honeymoon there, after World War II, and I just one of the things that I loved about New Orleans was how close it was, in my opinion, to disappearing back into the landscape. Like it always felt, we were talking about how urbanized it is,
Right.
but it always felt on the cusp of also disappearing, which of course in '06 it almost did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like we had a giant, we've been having no longer, but for a couple of days we had to boil our water because there was like a giant pipe burst on Claiborne Avenue near our house. And that's the kind of stuff you get. You're like, you just like, oh yeah, the street is falling apart because the land is sinking here. You become very aware of, how precarious things are. There's a writer I'm friendly with, Nathaniel Rich, had an interesting essay maybe last year, just like New Orleans kind of knows it's going to die. It's a city that's going to disappear in the not that distant future. And that's part of the vibrancy of this place. Like there's something to be gained by acknowledging that like cities, like all things, have lifespans, and we might be towards the end of ours. And that's part of the spirit of Mardi Gras and other things that happen here.
Wow. That's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Too. And I was thinking about Michael Lewis's story about the Esplanade Ridge during the flood. Have you ever read that?
No, I'll have to look that. I mean, I love his work. I don't know that I've read that one. So
it was one of my favorite ones. I think it was in the New Yorker, but he was looking for his grandmother or somebody who lived on Esplanade Ridge, and it was out of the flood,
Yep.
And the people he ran into, these black guys, were there, and they said, well, she may have been domed, which meant taken to the Superdome.
Yeah.
And they were moving folks around, and he talked about it over and over, like the idea of being domed, like being like sequestered, right? Taken away from your home.
Disappeared in its own way, right?
Disappeared, yeah. But he has a short piece about the geology of Esplanade Ridge and how it's quite a bit higher, I think,
Yeah, there are a few of them. I mean, and those ridges are all, that's again, the shape of the rivers, right? Like what waterways came through here. And it's a weird landscape because you think of a river valley is the river sits at the lowest point of the valley, but that's this delta that we talked about, both like delta in all its forms, is part of how people understood that Arkansas and Mississippi were connected down here in Louisiana. Is like, this is such low territory that the highest ground is by the river because it was all built by the river, and the river it kind of deposited most of its sediments right there next to it, and then it slopes away from that. So
wow,
like high ground is always river ground in this weird way. Right? So I'm 2 blocks from the river, and we're at some of the safest place in New Orleans because of that. Because even if there is a flood, that sets us higher, and we're less likely to hold water here.
Wow. Yeah. I was is the Camellia Grill still there on Carrollton?
It is. Yeah, I've never eaten. I almost went there the other week. It's just one of these places that my wife and I keep being like, oh yeah, one day I've got to eat there. She's been there. I have not.
It's good. It's I just remember the levee is really like right up again when you're sitting at the Camellia Grill. That's the place where you can see the boats go by and they're above you.
And that's one of the places where I like, there's actually a strip of home. Like people live on the riverside of the levee up there in this semi-illegal way. That's one of the places where I like to go. I'll go to Cooter Brown's and get a beer and some oysters, and then just like walk over the levee and wander around in the feral landscape right there.
So, right on. Well, yeah. I would recommend anybody to come to the book. You got a great piece on the shanty boat. Speaking of feral life.
Yep.
And a buddy of mine who had not read your book had talked to me the other day about the River Republic during the Depression around Vicksburg and Natchez.
I don't know about that.
It was a shanty boat. It was like a shanty boat rebellion. They just weren't gonna give up. And you know where the movie Mud was filmed?
I don't. I know it's on the river, but I don't know where.
Yeah, because they're in those river boats.
Right.
So, well, I will not keep you. That was awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Al. No, this was
great.
Book
in there, and just like I said, I don't think we threw any spoiler alerts in there. But
I mean, there's
a lot
it's not. It's not a book that you can spoil. I think people know the state of the Mississippi River, and it's more about unwinding just how we got here.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Boyce. I appreciate it. And
had a great time. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to following y'all on Southlands magazine too.
Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. Thanks, man.
Right. Take care.